Hi, good evening. I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this very special Mother's Day edition of Voices from the Village. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Move to Amend. A very exciting group we have here this evening. People have been talking a lot about corporate personhood, and tonight we'll be discussing the Move to Amend and their efforts to effect change on a national level. On January 21, 2010, with its ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, the United States Supreme Court ruled that corporations are persons entitled to the same freedoms of speech and same level of participation in the electoral process as any ordinary citizen. Thus, the concept of corporate personhood was born. Many observers and political systems believe that the court created this fiction and has opened the floodgates of campaign contributions which flow from corporations and have effectively transformed money into speech. The Move to Amend Coalition is a grassroots activist organization that is working toward the passage of a constitutional amendment that clearly and unequivocally states that rights recognized under the Constitution belong to human beings only, not to artificial legal entities such as corporations, and that political campaign spending is not a form of speech protected under the First Amendment. Move to Amend is endorsed by hundreds of organizations, nearly 300,000 people who have signed the petition to amend. We'll be talking about that petition in more detail shortly. Here locally, Move to Amend Santa Cruz has been working to bring awareness and activism to this issue through the sponsorship of a city council resolution and hosting a recent appearance by national Move to Amend organizer David Cobb. Some of the questions we'll be asking tonight about this issue are, why is corporate personhood such a dangerous and undemocratic concept? What is the process to amend the Constitution? What is the language of the amendment? What is Move to Amend's position on other proposals for taking action on this issue? What about unions and nonprofits? And maybe most importantly, what is their strategy for getting the amendment passed into law? These are but a few of the questions that will be asked and hopefully answered by our panel during the next hour. So I'm very happy to introduce my panel for this evening. Chris Finnie. Chris, welcome. Alain Desouches. Alain, welcome back. You were here for the Pachamama Alliance show a couple of months back. Wonderful. Really enjoyed it. And Marsha Hudson. Marsha, thank you for coming. Why don't we give just a brief introduction for each of you, and just for yourselves, tell the audience a little about something about yourself and how you are associated with Move to Amend, how you came to be engaged in that. Chris?
Well, I have been a political activist actually since 2003, and have been involved in a lot of different things and electoral politics and all this stuff, and was a little frustrating because I felt like there were so many people doing such good work, but it wasn't having as much of an impact as I really wanted. And when I started looking at why that was, over and over and over again, it was corporations taking things to court and getting them overturned on the basis of corporate personhood. Because this actually didn't start with Citizens United. It goes way back to the 1880s.
Right.
And so to me, that seemed to be a very foundational problem. That it was, we were making one step forward and they were taking us to court and pushing us 2 steps back. So until we got rid of this legal fiction, we were never going to win in so many of the other battles that matter to us. And I actually am a little bit unique, I think. So I'm one of the co-founders of Move to Amend in Santa Cruz County, of the Move to Amend affiliate here in the county. And I actually own a corporation. This is my corporation.
There you go.
So more than some people in this movement, I really understand the difference between a person
and let me understand
and a corporation.
This now. Corporation, person. Corporation, person. Corporation, person. Okay, thank you, Chris.
I thought it was fairly clear,
Alain, just briefly, a little something about yourself, of course, and your engagement with Move to Amend.
Right. Well, as you mentioned, I am part of the Pachamama Alliance.
Indeed.
And our mission there is to educate and inspire people to bring forth a world that is just, that is sustainable, and that is thriving. And one of the big obstacles we have in moving ahead with this mission is that there are structures that are firmly in place that are constantly, like you mentioned, nullifying the voice of the people, the will of the people. Right. And the main one is this strength that giant corporations have on the electoral process and on the we the people kind of process. Ballot initiatives can be overturned, state laws that can be overturned. I mean, it goes on and on. So this is a major obstacle. That's why I, as a Pachamama Alliance, we completely endorse the work of Move to Amend. I'm actually on the
And I know
steering
we've
committee
spoken
on
about that previously on the show, and I understand your passion for that. And Marsha?
Well, like Alain, I too am with the Pachamama Alliance, and I'm rather passionate about the issues that swirl around climate change, which I always refer to as the climate crisis. We certainly are at the point now at a crisis. And as Alain and Chris have so well put forth, every time you try, in anything I think in this country, though climate is starting to, in my mind, impact and will impact just about everything. When we talk about food, we're talking about water, we're talking about air, we're talking about the oceans, we're talking about flooding, we're talking about desertification. So anywhere you want to go and anything you want to do, you run up against the corporations. Right. And so, like Alain and Chris, I found that I needed to go where the basis and the foundation of the issue is, which is corporations rule rather than people rule.
Yeah, certainly.
And if we're going to have a world that we want to live in, we have to address this at the root. So a Move to Amend is a good place to,
wonderful,
to do
wonderful.
that effort.
Thank you. We're going to show a short video now that's produced by Move to Amend, as I understand it, and kind of give us some touchstones we can use in a further conversation. Alain, would you give us just a few seconds on an introduction of the video?
This is one of the great clips that Annie Leonard and in the Story of Stuff project, she put this clip together on the story of Citizens United. So actually it's a good way to introduce the topic.
Okay, well, and I have introduced it briefly in my remarks, but let's see that video now and give us an idea of where we're going to be in this conversation.
Bad for you, bad for America.
He'll put us back on track.
Hester ran our state into the ground. Now he wants to be your senator.
Stand up. Say no.
Stand up and say no.
Bad for you, bad for America.
Vote for this guy.
Vote for this guy.
Aren't you tired of this stuff? Why is it that every election season it becomes impossible to hear the facts over all these misleading ads? And if it seems the problem is only getting worse, that's because it is. We can thank the Supreme Court for that. In 2010, they decided that it would be just fine for corporations to spend as much money as they want telling us who to vote for. Wait, why are corporations telling us who to vote for? Let's get something straight. This is a democracy, rule by the people. I'm a person, you're a person, and Chevron, not a person. So shouldn't elections be all about what people want? Good jobs, safe products, health care, responsible government, clean air and water. It turns out the vast majority of Americans want to see a lot more done on all of these things. But what people want is going to take a back seat as long as corporations can spend millions getting lawmakers elected. Oil companies have gotten politicians to block laws protecting our climate. Manufacturers have pushed through trade agreements that gut product safety and help ship jobs overseas. Insurance companies have been the first ones consulted on health reform, and giant corporations have gotten bailouts and subsidies. Maybe that's why all kinds of people, Republicans, Democrats, independents, are totally frustrated with our government.
It's the government.
It's easy to get angry, but it's time we got smart and realized that the heart of our problem is not that we have bad lawmakers. We have a democracy in crisis. 85% of Americans feel that corporations have too much power in our democracy and people have too little. 85%. Hey, that's a majority. So let's get together and take our democracy back from the corporations. It's the first and most important step in making real progress on all the issues that people care most about. So how did we, the people, lose control of our democracy to begin with? Let's go back a few centuries. Back then, there were just people. Some of them owned businesses, some of them worked for businesses. Still, there were just people. Then people invented something entirely new, the corporation. These legal entities exist independently of the people who own them. If a corporation does something that gets it into trouble, the owners can say, Don't blame me, blame the corporation. I'm just a shareholder. When the United States came into existence, corporations were easier to keep in check. Back then, the government would grant them charters for a specific short-term project, like building a bridge or a railroad. Once they fulfilled their purpose, they were disbanded. But over time, the law changed, and corporations no longer had to be turned off once their project was complete. They began to live on indefinitely, with a much more general purpose: profit. And that's how the modern corporation was born. Today's corporations have evolved to have something very dangerous in their programming. Unlike people who are driven by all kinds of motivations, doing the right thing, love for family, their country, the planet, publicly traded corporations are now required by law and the markets to pursue one single motivation above all others: maximize value for shareholders. Make as much money as possible. That's it. No, really, that's what the law and the markets demand. Imagine a friend saying, "The only thing I care about is money." It's not someone you'd want to leave your kids with, or your democracy for that matter. Yes, it is people who run these corporations, but their human motivations come second. If they prioritize anything at all over maximizing profits, they're out of there. Can corporate leaders do good things like give to charity or try to be more green? Sure, but not if it conflicts with maximum profits. And since their humble beginnings, corporations have grown huge. 53 of the 100 biggest economies on Earth now are corporations. So corporations have a single-minded profit motive, they're humongous, and their owners can easily dodge the blame for any harm they cause. That makes them tricky to share a country with. If we want them to serve us and not the other way around, they need some basic ground rules. And that's where the government comes in, setting rules to keep things fair and safe and to protect society from corporations run amok. Now, if their main objective is to maximize profit, do you think corporations are content to follow the rules that keep them in check? No, of course not. They want to write those rules. But who is supposed to write the rules in a democracy? People. That's why one of the corporation's key strategies for sneaking into our democracy is saying that they should have the same First Amendment rights as real live people. And that's exactly how they won the 2010 Supreme Court case known as Citizens United versus FEC. In that case, 5 members of the Supreme Court decided that it's unconstitutional to put any limits on how much money corporations can spend influencing elections. Why? They said these limits violate the First Amendment guaranteeing free speech.
Well, that video clip certainly gives us much to discuss. I can tell you as a former lawyer that, I've viewed our Supreme Court rulings over time as being very uneven, and I think in this instance, I certainly would take exception to the findings that they've made on these facts. I'll say also that, as Alain knows, and maybe you as well, I'm the vice chair of our local ACLU, and you're certainly aware, sadly, that the national ACLU supports Citizens United. Fortunately for us, Northern California ACLU and our local ACLU does not, and so we are very much in support of any effort to abolish corporate personhood. The one other thing I'd like to mention is that we are a call-in show, so if you'd like to call in and ask myself or any of the guests here, that's what they're here for, is to answer your questions, kind of raise awareness. You can reach us at 425-8844. Okay, now Chris, please, can you give us an overview of corporate personhood and how it gradually evolved following Citizens United?
Well, this was actually, the little clip was very interesting because it does highlight some of the changes that have happened in corporations. And, a little corporation like mine, not the problem. Right. It's these huge multinational corporations that are immortal, right, that are the problem. But the issue of corporate citizen or corporate personhood, even though it's just come up to the public's notice in the Citizens United case, actually came up initially in 1886 in a Supreme Court ruling called Santa Clara County versus the Santa Fe Railroad. And at that time, there was an argument made on the basis of the 14th Amendment that said that corporations were people. And I read an article years ago by Tom Hayden, and he talks about how a court clerk actually put this into the margin of the decision. But the decision was accepted by the court unanimously. And so that was the first instance of calling a corporation a person. Now, since then, over those intervening more than 100 years, the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly in favor of corporate personhood. And they've overturned, as we were talking earlier, a lot of important environmental regulations, worker protections, product safety regulations, financial oversight, all sorts of stuff, primarily on the basis of the First Amendment, 4th, 5th, and 14th.
Right.
And I saw something funny on Facebook not too long ago. It said that before emancipation, the United States considered people property, and after Citizens United, we now consider property people.
That's interesting.
So, you know, the good thing about Citizens United from my point of view is that it has brought up this issue so that now people are aware of it. And they are starting through videos like this and through some of the work that we're doing and some of the work that other groups are doing. But people are starting to be aware of this as an issue. And I think that that's very good because the corporations have gotten away with taking this to court and getting a lot of laws, a lot of regulations, a lot of important protections for us as people overturned in the courts, and without people really knowing much about it.
Yeah, and I know that corporate personhood, abolishing corporate personhood, has become a rallying cry. I know that you were involved with the Occupy, and I was involved with Occupy Santa Cruz, and many of the other Occupies locally and regionally and across the country. Abolish corporate personhood. You know, that's something that they marched to. They said we have to do that because we are becoming a corporatist society. So that it's such a an insidious, a pervasive influence that corporations have. And this is one way to approach that and say we have to do something about it. Let's raise some awareness and let's actually see if we can get corporations to act responsibly, you know, and that is another thing entirely, but you know, we've always hoped that perhaps that they would. You had touched on how corporations as people, as persons, use or abuse our First Amendment guarantees and constitutional guarantees generally. Alain, you can tell us something about how they are using the First Amendment freedom of speech for their own purposes?
Yeah, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Okay, so by corporation using this right for themselves as people, they are completely subverting the will of the people. As an example, it's happening this month, actually last week. The Labor Board made a rule that asking employers to post notice on the board, on the bulletin board, confirming for employees the right to unionize, to strike, to bargain collectively, to improve their working conditions. Well, the employers in this particular case refused to do that, invoking that they don't have to do that. Well, the Circuit Court board. The Circuit Court ruled that the board was actually acting illegally by punishing an employer for failing to post a statement that was ordered by the board. Well, the federal court struck down the labor rule, citing that the employer's right under the First Amendment, freedom, had the right to speak or not to speak. In other words, they equivocated posting a statement as an act of speech, and they don't have to protect the First Amendment. So there it goes. I mean, this is just an example.
Well, it seems like
and this actually raises a very good point, though, and that is that if I, as an employee, walk onto the grounds of my company, I lose my free speech rights while I'm on their property. They get to control, like, for example, if I start trying to organize a union and they don't like that, they can fire me because I've lost my free speech rights when I'm on their property. So one of the issues for me is that they want to be a person when they want to be a person, but when they don't, they don't. So the employees are losing their free speech rights. The employers are claiming theirs. But if they break the law, they don't have to go to jail, whereas the employees do. You know, so they want to pick and choose when they want to be a person and when they don't.
To me, it seems doubly troubling, if I can use that phrase, that they are really abridging two bedrock values in our society. One is freedom of speech, and one is the right to collectively bargain. You know, so they're in one stroke. You know, they're abridging really, I think, of the fundamental rights of not only citizens but workers. You know, in this country. You know, Chris, while you're mentioning the Constitution and some of these abridgments that we're discussing, how about the Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment? Understanding that corporate personhood is using these for their own purposes as well.
Well, you know, Marsha mentioned the environmental issues, and you mentioned that it was Mother's Day, and one of the reasons that I'm a political activist is because I'm also a mother.
Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you. And I'm not real thrilled about leaving the planet and the country in the state that it's in to my son. So I'm worried about the fact that we have now not only passed the 350 parts per million CO2, but 400. So I'm real interested in the environmental regulations, and I think a lot of people are, and a lot of people are starting to realize that they're impacting everything, as Marsha said. So, but it's to the point now where the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So when the EPA wants to go out and they want to see, and there was a case, a wire mesh manufacturer in Massachusetts in 1997, an employee reported that their environmental systems had broken down and that they were discharging dangerous effluent into the local river. So the EPA had to go to court to get a warrant to inspect their premises, because otherwise violated their Fourth Amendment rights against illegal search and seizure.
It's also true that if the administrative searches have a lower burden in order to get those warrants, but nevertheless, you're exactly right.
And so that case, even though the EPA had a warrant, was later overturned because they sampled the water without the knowledge of the owner of the plant, even though they had a warrant. So it was overturned because it was unreasonable search and seizure. So we are really hamstringing. I mean, you know, you've got plants out in Texas that are blowing up nursing homes and elementary schools because they're storing 400 and 500 times the amount of dangerous materials that they're supposed to have without any protections and fire suppression and stuff like that. And you got to get a warrant to go inspect them? Okay, that's good. So the Fifth Amendment says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So a lot of cities, and so this is not just happening at the federal level, this is happening, as Alain mentioned, at the state level and even at the local level. So there are, for example, what was the name of that town that banned fracking? I think
Dryden.
Dryden
in New York.
In New York, okay. I thought it was
we had
New
talked
York.
about that during the Alliance program as well, yes.
And so the oil companies, enormously profitable giant oil companies that own the mineral rights to this shale stuff, can and probably will go to court, they have gone to court, and said, you are taking our property and our right to use it as we see fit and to profit from it as we see fit without just compensation by banning fracking. You know, it's been proven that they have impacted drinking water supplies in, I think it was Montana or Wyoming, I forget which one. You know, earthquakes, methane leaks, over and over and over again, right? But, and that decision was upheld, the first court case. but they're going to go back to court because they're immortal and they have unlimited resources, and so they're going to keep taking that little town to court until they bankrupt them.
That is the manipulation of the process, the manipulation of the judicial process that we've talked about before. They have such power and reach that they're able to make that that system, which really should work in an egalitarian fashion for everybody. It works in their benefit and to the detriment, really, of private property owners. And that's really another thing to lead into, is that there is an equal protection aspect to this as well. And Alain, you have something that you can add about the 14th Amendment and equal protection?
Right. Well, the equal protection, which was designed initially for protecting the rights of African American, has been now taken over by corporations to do things like Watney of Smithfield operated a meat packing plant on the Pagan River in Smithfield, Virginia. Okay, this was a case between 81 and 84. The company repeatedly violated the condition of its permit to pollute by discharging excessive quantities of 5 pollutants in the Chesapeake Bay. What is Chesapeake Bay Foundation?
Chesapeake.
Chesapeake. Wow, okay, whatever. Excuse my French.
Nevertheless, we know what you're talking about.
That's good old American Indian.
Right, Chesapeake, yeah. They sent notice of their intent to file a citizen suit against under the Clean Water Act. But they got nowhere because the court ruled that citizens could sue a corporation only for an ongoing violation. So because it must provide polluters with 60-day notice, the polluters had time to fix up. So therefore, when they were sampled, it was not like a current violation. So the quick fix to avoid the litigation. And so I mean, that to me points that to a flaw of the judicial process, which is focusing on procedures instead of principles.
And that really,
intuitively, it's wrong,
of course.
But by the legalese, it's right.
And the plain fact is that if we were to assume, just for the sake of argument, that corporations and people had the same standing and they should have the same protection, but one should not be protected more than the other, this is where, to me, the wheels go off the wagon. Because corporations are not only getting equal protection, they're getting more than equal protection. And that's the thing that we really have to take a look at. Interesting how they can manipulate these guaranteed rights with the Constitution and make them work for themselves and really against private individuals. That is something that we really have to address and do something about. And how are we going to do that? Marsha, that's what we want to talk about next. How is the amendment process going to go forward, and why is this the right approach? I know that's been asked about move to amend. Is this the right approach? Can this be done? Are there other options? What in move to amend's opinion makes this the right approach?
Yeah. Well, I always remind myself when I think about these matters that move to amend is kind of the inheritor of a lot of work that has gone before. And so the question of how best to address the corporate personhood and lay it to rest for forever really gets into using some of the work that's gone before. I have to mention that WILF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, has done some fabulous work.
No question about it.
And there's another organization I do want to kind of give them a little bit of attention to, is called POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. They've been around for about 15 years working on this. And those organizations have been approaching this through a constitutional amendment, primarily because we are the kinds of activities that corporations are engaging is at the level of the Constitution, with the amendments and some of the Commerce Clause, which I think is the first article. And it goes way back, as we've mentioned more than once, so there's a lot of different decisions that have piecemeal built up the power of the corporations in this regard. So there's a lot to be addressed, and if you were to go and do that through legislation, you would end up doing lots of little piecemeal legislations. What needs to be done is one statement, much like the 14th Amendment, which provides equal protections. So it's because that you need to move at a higher level where you can foreclose on all the other possibilities that makes that the right approach.
And of course, this is very much a grassroots, citizen-driven effort, and I think that's what makes it appealing to a lot of people, particularly now when there's so much more engagement in public issues. You know, the communities are so much more interested in how we're going to protect the future. What is the pathway to the future? How are we going to do that?
That's actually a really good point. You know, the process of getting a constitutional amendment, the one that we've used anyway consistently in this country, there are actually two ways, but I'm not going to mention the one that's not been used, is that the Congress does a joint resolution, both House and Senate, together, and it has to be a 2/3 vote in both chambers to actually launch the process, and then it goes out to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify, and it's at that level where it's super grassroots, and it's right down to your own village where you start getting involved in this.
But the move to amend resolution has been on the ballot 27 times at various different levels, sometimes city, sometimes county, sometimes state. It has won all 27 times. And to the point that Marsha was mentioning, sorry about that.
You know, I was thinking that I was going to call her Martha tonight, and I haven't, and yet you have done that.
And I just
thank
did
you
it.
very
Sorry
much
about
for
that.
relieving me of that burden.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
One of the problems with doing a fix legislatively is that legislation can be overturned. Of course. The Supreme Court overturned McCain-Feingold in Citizens United. That was the whole thing, you know. And the only thing that the courts cannot overturn is the Constitution. So the only way that we can guarantee that we're going to have this protection is to actually put it in the Constitution. There are some amendments out there already that are being our amendment has actually been introduced into the House in mid-February by Representatives Nolan and Pocan. But there are other amendments that are out there to overturn the Citizens United ruling. It's a much more limited approach, and that is kind of our issue with some of the other amendments that have been proposed.
Yeah, that needs to be emphasized because the Citizens United, as devastating as we all, not all, but many of us say it was,
and I would agree
it really is also coming, it's possible because it comes on the backs of all of the other decisions that have gone before. So that if you overturn Citizens United, you're not overturning corporate personhood because that's pre-existing. So, and that's really at the core of what needs to be addressed.
That's very important. To
and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your efforts can work in parallel. You can hope that the Congress will spontaneously sponsor an amendment themselves, then vote on it and have it ratified by the various states, or you can get this going yourself. I know that we're still working on the equal protection for women. We're struggling to get that through for many, many, many years.
30.
We were able to get the lower the voting age to 18, which we got through. But
that happened very rapidly.
It's something that started in a groundswell, you know, very, very much of a grassroots movement, and then it got to the point where, okay, we're going to have a constitutional amendment, and then we're going to send it back to the states to ratify it.
Well, this is definitely grassroots. I mean, I think everybody knows. I mean, it's amazing to me when I mention a move to amend. I've just recently become an active member. It's amazing to me how many people their eyes light up when you mention these issues. And there's a lot of different things that move to amend is doing. I mean, it does have to start with the House, I mean, with the legislature. But all over the United States already, hundreds of municipalities and hundreds of organizations have already signed on in terms of either signing our petition, and also passing resolutions and measures and initiatives.
Well, let's, while you have an opportunity now, let's see the second part or the last part of that wonderful video that we saw earlier and see what we have to say about that when we play it, all right?
Now, obviously, our founding fathers who wrote the First Amendment were trying to protect the free speech of people. But this decision rides on the crazy argument that corporations should be treated the same as people and get the same rights that real people get. This means corporations can spend as much as they want, whenever they want. Now, obviously, our founding fathers who wrote the First Amendment were trying to protect the free speech of people. But this decision rides on the crazy argument that corporations should be treated the same as people and get the same rights that real people get. This means corporations can spend as much as they want, whenever they want, to intimidate or crush candidates running on a platform against their interests and support candidates who will do what they ask. It's great news for corporations wanting to handpick the lawmakers whose job it is to keep them in check. Now, I am all for free speech. If every shareholder and employee at Exxon wants to personally support some oil lobbyist running for Senate, that's their right. There are millions more people who will support a different candidate. That's democracy in action. But now, Exxon or any other corporation can decide to spend unlimited dollars from its huge corporate coffers to influence an election without even consulting its shareholders. This is a big deal. If the top 100 corporations decided to throw in just 1% of their profits, they could outspend every candidate for president, House, and Senate combined. Good luck having your free speech heard over that. So did opening the floodgates on this money actually cause a flood? Sure did. In 2010, the kind of independent groups that corporations are now allowed to support spent $300 million. That's more than every midterm election since 1990 combined. So corporations are drowning out our voices, getting what they want, and our democracy is in trouble. But we can totally save it. People are so outraged by the Supreme Court decision that a massive response is mobilizing. Such a huge problem requires a huge solution, and we've got one. A new constitutional amendment. The amendment is smart and clear. It reverses this disaster to our democracy by clarifying that the First Amendment isn't meant for for-profit corporations. I get that amending the Constitution is a big, ambitious goal, but it's not impossible. Every time huge positive change has been made in this country, it's because people dreamed big, aimed high, and set ambitious goals. It's time to do that now, because the life of our democracy is on the line. Public financing of campaigns would be another huge step forward. Congress is working on a bill right now that would make it possible for candidates to get elected without corporate dollars. Remember, 85% of Americans think that corporations have too much influence in our democracy. That's enough to make change if we can turn that sentiment into action. Look, the corporations won't get out of our democracy until we, the people, get back in. So keep fighting for renewable energy, green jobs, healthcare, safe products, and top-notch public education. But save some energy for the battle of our lifetimes. A battle that can open the door to solving all of these things. It's time to put corporations back in their place and to put the people back in charge of our democracy.
And that video does highlight something that certainly has concerned me during my political career here in Santa Cruz. We were discussing earlier that I had run for city council in 2012 and 2010, 2012. And the level of money that needs to be raised, and most of which is raised through the business entities in town. So it's not an exact analogy, as Marsha and I were talking about, but still the business corporation-driven effect on the electorate. I've seen that firsthand. They made mention in the video as well of publicly financed elections. And anyone who's seen any of examples of public financed elections, it's a transformative process. You know, it levels the playing field completely. So this is one of the things that I observed myself and have been affected by in terms of financing elections, de-leveling of the playing field with corporate sponsorships and corporate influence. So, you know, for myself, I would love to see the electoral playing field, as I say, be level and equal for everyone, and that is certainly an equal protection issue as well.
The states where public financing was enacted, what they found was that the number of women and people of color who ran for office skyrocketed, and not only ran but won. And yet these public financing laws that were enacted in the states and that were so successful in the states, Janet Napolitano, for example, became governor in one of those states. You know, a woman governor, which was fairly rare in those days. They have been overturned. So,
well, and I know that I wanted to talk about something that you touched upon just briefly earlier, and that's the dual citizenship paradox. So you give us just a couple of minutes about the dual citizenship paradox of corporations.
You know, there were actually, the reason that I started a corporation is because I'm lousy at saving money. So every quarter I would have to pay estimated taxes as a self-employed person. And I frequently had to pay penalties because I hadn't saved enough money. So as a corporation, I'm an employee of my corporation. I get to pay myself a payroll check, and I get to take it out every 2 weeks, and I don't have to worry about saving it. But the other reason to form a corporation, and the reason that most large corporations do it, and the video actually touched on this in the first segment, is that it provides protection. If you are a manager, an employee, a shareholder, an investor, you cannot be sued for the activities of the corporation. So they get to pollute, they get to blow up half of West Texas, they get to, you know, do all sorts of outrageous things, kill people with faulty products, poison people, you know, do whatever, and they get a fine. Now, if you and I did something like that, we would go to jail for the rest of our natural lives for killing 14 people in Texas, you know?
Or we might be executed.
There you go.
We have a caller. Let's see what question the caller might have. Bruce, are you with us? Bruce from Santa Cruz, are you there? Evidently, we can't hear Bruce. Anyway. So go ahead, Chris.
So you know, you have a situation where the corporations get the protections of the Constitution, but they do not get the legal liability. Now, my neighbor the other day said, and I've heard this argument before, he said, well, but people own corporations, which is true. I own stock in corporations, you know. And so corporations really are people, which is what Mitt Romney was trying to say when he rather inelegantly said that corporations are people. That was what he really meant.
Amongst his inelegant statements, that would certainly be one. Yeah.
As many, my friend.
Oh, wait a minute. Now we have Bruce again. Pardon me, Chris. Bruce, are you there? Well, we're unable to hear Bruce out here, so we're just going to have to move on and hope that he is as patient with us as we were trying to be with him.
So a lot of people will say, but corporations are people. You know, they're the employees, they're the shareholders, they're owned by people, they're run by people. And, you know, my response to this is those people already have constitutional protections. They do not need them twice, okay?
Of course,
and that's one. And number two is that I don't find the need for constitutional protections in order to profitably run a company.
Right, there you
I
go.
have run many, and I have never needed them.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Let's move on, if we can, now to what's been going on locally. Marsha, you have some information for us about the Move to Amend the musical, as I understand it. Very exciting. Singing and dancing as we.
Yes. Now there is a lot of stuff going on that Alain and Chris could talk about better than I, because I am relatively new to the organization, being involved. But I come from I wear many hats, and one is I'm a dancer, and I have danced in the Santa Cruz Follies. And another person in Move to Amend, Carol English, has also. And so she and I, and also I know some other people have fed into this, thought, and really it was Carol who had the first idea, let's do a musical and take all of the energy and the ideas about corporate personhood and what Move to Amend and others are trying to do. So we have started, and we're just starting to brainstorm. But it's really just, I mean, already I'm starting to think of songs that we can kind of adjust, modify, like Stop, in the Name of Love.
I love that. That's wonderful. That's right.
But you can just, your brain just starts going on this a lot. But we thought what we'd do is put this musical, it's going to be about a half-hour production initially, in the context of a conflict of values. Because basically what I see developing all over the world, really, because of transnational corporations, we're not talking about America, we're talking about what's happening all over the planet, is that there's a real intense conflict of values with the corporations making decisions and making moves according to what they understand to be their objective, which is money. So profits. So it's property profits versus what people are interested in, which is people and what we need to live healthy, happy lives. And that's where we have this huge conflict. I think it's all over the planet. And so we're going to use that as the way of organizing this musical, and then we're going to do a lot of dancing. We're thinking about West Side Story, the energy that you get in the jets and the various what do they call them, gangs.
Oh, there you go.
But there's just all kinds of possibilities.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And it's open to anyone who's interested,
Well,
actually.
we'll be looking forward to that, and we still have some time, but I want to make sure that we talk about your forum that's coming up. Chris, you give us some information about that that's happening on May the 23rd, as I understand it.
Yes, at Santa Cruz High School in the auditorium, and it's the People's Democratic Club, actually.
Of which I am a proud member, right on the People's Democratic Club.
Me too, actually. The forum is called Democracy for the Rest of Us. So it's going to be, as you said, May 23rd at 7 p.m. It's a Thursday, and it will be in the Santa Cruz High School auditorium. There are going to be a number of speakers. Common Cause will be there, CalPERG will be there, WILF will be there, and Move to Amend will be there. And so we're going to be presenting our various viewpoints on this situation and our various solutions for this situation. We also do hold monthly meetings as a group. You can go to movetoamend.org and get information about our group and contact information for our group. We have a Facebook page, Move to Amend Santa Cruz. And everybody's invited.
And I'll mention, just as an aside, because I had mentioned the ACLU and their support of Citizens United nationally, one of the members of our board was Olga Ubin. And Olga was very strongly alarmed and agitated about the fact that National ACLU was supporting Citizens United, and we have to take a strong stand at NorCal and locally, and she decided that her time would be better spent working with Move to Amend, and it was right at the time when your chapter here was forming. And so I haven't spoken to her recently, but my assumption is that she's taken her many skills and talents and energy and passion and applied it to what is really a tremendous cause. I noticed also on this that Micah Posner, our city council member, will be talking about publicly financed elections. I know that that's really one of his big issues. During the campaign, he and I had both agreed to voluntarily limit our spending to within the campaign limitations, and I'm not certain how many of the other candidates did, but the point is that if you're going to have a truly level election playing field, as I mentioned earlier, you're really going to have to figure out some way to have them publicly financed. And so this really is in line with a lot of the discussions that's been happening in town about a whole range of issues, you know, and certainly when you're talking about homelessness or needle exchange or social services, Move to Amend and corporate personhood is one of the issues that should be right alongside in the first rank of the things that we're really talking about.
When I was working with the Disclose Act, the first time that it came up, not this time, but the last time, several elected officials came and spoke in Santa Cruz about that act, and they talked about, and I remember John Leopold saying that his race was at that point, and it is no longer, I'm pretty sure, but at that point, the most expensive race in the history of the county, just for a supervisor's seat.
When he ran against Betty Danner?
Yeah.
Because I know they spent a tremendous, I was shocked at how much money they had spent
but I'm pretty
for a
sure
supervisorial election in Santa Cruz County.
That McPherson versus Hammer just beat that.
Yeah, well, Bruce McPherson was thought to have spent upwards to $150,000 something, and Eric kind of struggled along raising as much money, put up the good fight, as you well know. You were mentioning something about getting resolutions, or not resolutions, but getting this on ballots in the county and doing that from the grassroots level. Tell us a little more about that, because that is something that I would be very interested in hearing about, and I'm sure our viewers would be as well.
Yeah. you know, as you mentioned, and I think Alain mentioned, quite a number of elected bodies have had resolutions that they approved, and Santa Cruz City is one of them.
And we touched upon that earlier, but we'll save that conversation for a different time. Yeah. So.
And that's great. You know, having elected officials who are supporting our work and see the necessity to make this change is fabulous. But Marsha was mentioning when we were chatting earlier that it's really more powerful if it's the voice of the citizens.
No question about
and
it.
So, and I mentioned earlier that this has actually been on ballots at various different levels all over the country. 27 times. It has won 27 times. And so we hope to put it on the ballot for citizen approval in the state, probably 2016. And we're hoping to do it at some point, maybe 2014, in the county. And so we would like to have a resolution on the county ballot. And one of the reasons that we like to have it on the ballot, not just because it's stronger when it's the voice of the people saying it, but because it gives us an opportunity for citizen engagement and for citizen education. So that people, because generally we do tabling, and so you will see us out tabling on Pacific Avenue and at farmers markets and stuff like that. And you know, when we say to people that what we're basically doing is trying to say that corporations are not people and money is not speech, the typical response is, duh. You know, but people don't realize the scope of the issue.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a big believer in the concept that all politics are local, and I think what frustrates people about this issue is they see the enormity of it. Oh my God, you know, you want to, you know, amend the Constitution of the United States. It's an overwhelming effort that it takes to do that. But really, if you bring it down to your local level, you start to organize here, you start to get some of the things done that you're talking about, then it is doable incrementally as you build up to that. And I know that that's one of the national organizers have considered that, and I know that you're all considering that. Well, but I think it is one of the things people say, my gosh, how are you going to do this? You know,
one of the
huge
programs
project
that they're doing right now is called Pledge to Amend, where people have been going and visiting their elected representatives. So you would go to visit Sam Farr or Anna Eshoo in this county.
Or Steve Pleich, if he ever gets elected to city council.
And there you go. Well, hopefully you would back us. And, but you would go and you would say, when this is brought up in Congress, we hope you will support it. As your constituents, we hope you will support it.
Since you mentioned it, what's Sam's position on this? Has he indicated one way or another
I don't know.
any kind of inclination?
I don't know.
Yeah. Because it is something that...
He has actually. He has.
Has he?
Yeah, I looked at it, you know, a couple of years ago. I have a letter from him on that, that he's been very clear about his support of a resolution to undo.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, you know, and I do think that, you know, for some people it's easy to take, you know, the anti-corporatist corporations are not people approach, but I think in order to really engage on the issue you have to understand it, you know, to the depth that you folks certainly do, and really do something practical. You know, politics again is the art of the possible. What can you do, you know, from where you are to where you want to be?
The first thing people need to do is to go to movetoamend.org and sign the petition, because I mean, the more people sign the petition, the more this number keeps growing.
It's almost at 300,000 now.
Yeah, that's, I mentioned that in the introduction. Of course, we were talking earlier, because I was going to mention some of the groups that had endorsed Move to Amend. Wolf, of course, Sierra Club, People's Democratic Club, some of the others that we had talked about.
The list is long.
And we were saying, well, how many are there? And Marsha was saying, well, I was going to count, and we went to look for it, and it was just page after page after page. So it's really, there's an enormous, I think, amount of support.
Well, and I think you just mentioned the Sierra Club, and we were talking about the environment as being one of the things that we were interested in.
I was a little surprised to see it on there, but now I do see the connection. Yeah.
Exactly, because so many of these groups are starting to say, listen, we want workers' rights. We keep losing because of this issue. We want environmental protections. We keep losing because of this issue. So many of the things that are important to so many of the people in Santa Cruz County especially. I think this county has so many groups and so many people who are so well-intentioned and who are so active and who are so passionate about getting these good things done to support people having a better life. And it's so frustrating to see all of that passion and all of that goodwill and all of that energy constantly bashing up against these stupid corporations, you know? It's a box of papers.
The point being that you have to splash enough water on that rock to actually make some change. What we believe is there is the kind of civic engagement in Santa Cruz, the people of goodwill, people of good intentions, who can get things done. Yes. And I think it's a question of focusing their efforts, of getting them to understand what they need to do, what the level of their commitment needs to be.
Yes.
And then I think that something like this, even if, although it seems to be an enormous undertaking, can ultimately be done, and the victory can be won at the end of the day.
Yeah, I want to just jump in
however
with,
long in the future that day is.
With one real clear-cut example that we have here locally. I mean, it locally reaches out to me, to my way of thinking, to all over the world. We have shale, some of the best shale in the world here in Monterey County. And of course, there's now a lot of talk about fracking, and now they have not started fracking with our shale yet, but it's on the horizon. Yeah. That's right in our that's our Monterey Bay, and it is big oil, of course, that wants to do that, of course, and this is again profit up against the values of what is good for the people.
And on that note, we're going to finish. Thank you so much, Chris, Alain, Marsha. For Charlie Phillips, our producer, for everybody that makes this possible at CTV, I'm Steve Pleich saying support community TV whenever you can, and thank you for watching this edition of Voices from the Village. Good night.
Wonderful. All right. Actually, that was a good last line.